signed the prenup, Rachel. You leave with what you came with, absolutely nothing. Derek laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls of the penthouse hallway, his arm draped around his pregnant mistress.
You have to believe me.
How can I trust you? He's telling the truth.
Please, just trust me.
Was defeated. But he didn't check the visitor list. He didn't know that the black Cadillac Escalade pulling up to the curb 3 days later didn't belong to a taxi service but to Sterling Technologies' CEO. Derek was about to learn that silence isn't weakness. It's just the calm before the storm. The rain in Seattle always felt like a warning, but on that Tuesday night in November, it felt like a verdict. Rachel stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse on the 42nd floor, watching the city lights blur through the downpour. Behind her, the sound of a zipper tearing shut was the only noise in the expansive, sterile living room. The Tiffany chandelier overhead cast sharp shadows across Italian marble floors that had never felt like home. She'd spent 3 years walking across this cold stone, always careful, always quiet, always trying to be enough. "Are you even listening to me?" Derek's voice was sharp, a serrated knife that had been cutting away at her self-esteem for 36 months. Rachel turned slowly, hands buried in the pockets of her beige cardigan, the same one she'd worn the day they met back when he'd called it charming. Now he called it drab. Her husband, Derek Marcus Holloway, stood by the door, a leather suitcase at his feet. It wasn't his suitcase. It was hers. The old battered thing she had brought with her when she moved in 3 years ago, back when she was still Rachel Morgan, the librarian who believed in love stories. "I heard you, Derek." Her voice was steady, though her hands were trembling inside the pockets. The apartment smelled of new leather, the sofa Vanessa had picked out last month, already redecorating before Rachel was even gone. The scent mixed with Derek's cologne Creed Aventus, the one that cost $300 a bottle. She used to love that smell. Now it made her nauseous. "You want me out? I don't just want you out, Rachel. I am putting you out tonight." Derek checked his Rolex Daytona, the platinum timepiece gleaming under the chandelier light. She knew that watch cost more than her father's entire pension. He'd made sure she knew. He made sure everyone knew the price of everything he owned. "Vanessa is moving in tomorrow morning. I don't want her to see your clutter. It's bad for the baby's energy." The mention of that name sent a cold spike through Rachel's chest, sharp and sudden. Vanessa wasn't just a random woman, she was Derek's executive assistant. A woman Rachel had cooked dinner for on late nights when deadlines loomed. A woman Rachel had thanked for organizing Derek's schedule so he could be home for their anniversary. An anniversary he had spent texting Vanessa under the dinner table, his thumb moving in steady rhythm while Rachel talked about maybe trying for a baby again. "She's pregnant." Rachel stated it, not asked. The rumors had reached her weeks ago, whispered by the doorman and the cleaning staff who looked at Rachel with pity in their eyes, the kind of pity that comes before someone gets discarded. 4 months. Derek smirked, adjusting his silk Brooks Brothers tie. The navy one. His power tie. "It's a boy. An heir. Something you clearly couldn't provide." That was the lowest blow, and Derek knew it. He knew about the complications, the quiet visits to Dr. Henderson at the fertility clinic, the tears Rachel had shed in the guest bathroom when her period came again and again. He knew she wanted a family more than anything. He'd held her hand through the first appointment back when he still pretended to care. By the 3rd appointment, he'd started sending his assistant to reschedule his calendar, the same assistant now carrying his child. "We have a lease, Derek. My name is on the building access." Rachel tried to reason, though she knew it was futile. Her name was on nothing that mattered. The prenup had made sure of that. Derek laughed, a dry, humorless bark that belonged in a courtroom, not a marriage. He walked over to the glass coffee table and picked up a thick envelope. Legal size, cream-colored, expensive stationery. He tossed it at her with the same casual disdain he'd used to toss a piece of junk mail. It hit her chest and fell to the cold marble floor, landing with a slap that seemed to echo. "That's the divorce filing and a reminder of the prenup you signed." Derek's voice shifted into recitation mode, the same tone he used when pitching to clients when he needed to sound authoritative and unchallengeable. Article 4, Section 2. In the event of infidelity or dissolution initiated by the higher-earning spouse due to irreconcilable incompatibility, the dependent spouse waives all rights to alimony property and assets. Rachel looked down at the papers. The words blurred together. She'd signed that prenup 3 years ago in the office of Derek's lawyer, not her lawyer, his, while Derek smiled and promised it was just a formality, just to protect what we're building together. She'd been so naive, so desperate to believe that someone successful and charming could love a quiet librarian from Capitol Hill. "I never cheated on you." The words came out softer than she intended. She wanted them to sound strong, defiant. Instead, they sounded like a plea. "Doesn't matter." Derek sneered, stepping closer, looming over her with his 6'1" frame. She could smell the Woodford Reserve bourbon on his breath. He'd already been celebrating. "I have the best lawyers, Rachel. Silas Thorne represents me. Do you know his billing rate? It's more than you used to make in a year as a librarian. If you fight me, I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging for a cardboard box to sleep in. Just sign the uncontested papers, take your trash and leave." He kicked the suitcase toward her. It slid across the marble with a scraping sound that made her flinch. The handle was broken on one side, held together with duct tape she'd applied 2 years ago. She'd meant to replace it. There had never been time. Or maybe there had been time, but Derek had always dismissed her wants as unnecessary expenses. "You're making a mistake, Derek." Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper, the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. "The only mistake I made was thinking you could fit into my world. You're dull, Rachel. You have no connections, no ambition, no style. Vanessa, she fits the brand. You're just a placeholder." The elevator dinged. The private doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss. 2 security guards stepped in, both men Rachel had greeted by name every morning for 3 years. Jerry, the older one with kind eyes and a daughter in college. Tom, younger, always polite, always holding the door. Now they looked down at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "Escort Mrs. Holloway out." Derek turned his back to pour himself another bourbon from the crystal decanter on the bar cart. Woodford Reserve, the bottle with the fancy label he kept for impressing clients. He didn't even glance at Rachel as he gave the order. "And take her keycard." "Mr. Holloway, it's pouring outside." Jerry's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. He'd worked security in this building for 15 years. He'd seen divorces before. This one seemed to bother him. "Not my problem, Jerry. Do your job or I'll find someone who will." Rachel raised a hand to stop Jerry from grabbing her arm. Dignity. That's all she had left. She wouldn't let Derek take that too. "It's okay, Jerry. I can walk." She bent down and picked up the envelope and her suitcase. The papers inside detailed exactly how little Derek thought she was worth. She didn't pack her clothes, the ones Derek had bought for charity galas and client dinners, the ones that came with instructions about what to wear and how to smile. She didn't take the jewelry he'd purchased for photo opportunities, the pieces that looked expensive in pictures but felt like chains around her neck. She didn't take the iPad or the credit cards with his name embossed in gold. She took only the suitcase she came with, the one that held a few personal items Derek had never cared enough to notice. As she reached the elevator, she paused and looked back at Derek. He was sipping his drink, admiring his reflection in the darkened window that overlooked the city. The rain streaked down the glass behind him, distorting the lights into abstract shapes. He looked pleased with himself. Victorious. "Derek." She said his name. He didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Rachel." His voice was dismissive, final. She was already erased from his life, a footnote he'd crossed out. "I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember exactly how it felt to be this powerful." Her voice was eerily calm, carrying a weight she didn't fully understand herself. Something in her tone must have registered because Derek's hand paused halfway to his mouth, the glass suspended. But he didn't turn. He didn't acknowledge her. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing her out of the life she had tried so hard to build. The descent took 58 seconds. Rachel counted every one. When she stepped out into the lobby of the Obsidian Tower, the cold November wind slapped her face instantly. The The rain was torrential, coming down in sheets that blurred the streetlights into smears of yellow and white. She had no umbrella. Derek had never let her keep one by the door. It ruined the aesthetic of the foyer. She dragged her suitcase onto the wet pavement of 4th Avenue. She had $47 in her pocket. Her personal bank account had been drained. Derek had joint access and had likely frozen it pending litigation, a dirty tactic his lawyer probably suggested over their $1,800 lunch last week. Rachel walked 2 blocks, her sneakers soaking through, with each step water seeping between her toes until her feet went numb. The cardigan clung to her skin, heavy and cold. She found refuge under the awning of a closed coffee shop on Pine Street, the metal grate pulled down over the windows. The sign above read, "Joe's Coffee," in faded letters. She'd passed this place 100 times back when she worked at the library, back when life was simpler. She shivered, pulling her coat tighter, though it did nothing against the cold that had settled into her bones. A few people passed by, hunched under umbrellas, faces hidden. To them, she was just another tragic figure in the city night, another casualty of something they'd scroll past on their phones tomorrow morning. But Rachel wasn't crying. Crying required energy she didn't have. She was too shocked, too numb, her mind struggling to process how 3 years of marriage could end in 58 seconds of elevator descent. A homeless man sat on a crate near the corner about 10 yards away. He watched her suitcase with calculating eyes. She gripped the handle tighter. Rachel opened the suitcase with trembling fingers. Inside were a few changes of clothes she'd grabbed in those final minutes, practical things Derek had never noticed her wear. A book The Great Gatsby dog-eared and underlined, a gift from her father before he died. And hidden beneath the lining something else. She ripped the inner seam she'd sewn years ago, back when she'd first started her new life. Her fingers brushed against something cold and hard. A burner phone, old model battery, probably dead, and a small leather notebook with a single phone number written on the first page in her own handwriting. She had promised herself she would never make this call. She had left that world behind 10 years ago to live a normal, humble life, away from the spotlight, away from the pressure, away from him. She wanted to be loved for herself, not for the name she was born with. Derek had loved Rachel, the librarian, or so she thought, but he had destroyed her. Now he was going to meet Rachel Sterling. She powered on the old phone. The screen flickered to life, battery at 8%. It had been charging in that hidden pocket for years, kept alive by paranoia and a brother's insistence. Her fingers, numb from the cold, dialed the number. It rang once, twice. In the background she could hear the city cars splashing through puddles, a siren wailing somewhere to the south, the steady drum of rain on the awning above her. "This is a private line. Identify yourself." The voice was deep, curt, carrying the authority of someone used to commanding boardrooms and bending markets to his will. Nathaniel Sterling didn't waste time with pleasantries, not even at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Rachel took a breath, the smell of rain and exhaust filling her lungs. "It's me, Nate." There was a silence on the other end so profound it felt like the line had gone dead. 5 seconds. 10. Then she heard it, the sound of a chair scraping back. Movement. Urgency. A door opening. Footsteps on marble. Her brother was moving before he'd even processed the implications. "Ellie. Ellie, is that you?" The corporate steel in his voice cracked, splintering into something raw. She hadn't heard him use that nickname in a decade. Her chest tightened. "My God. We've been looking. Where are you?" Nate's voice shifted, rapid-fire questions coming through the phone like bullets. "I'm in Seattle. I made a mistake, Nate. You were right. You were right about everything. Are you safe?" The question came fast-clipped. Already he was assessing, calculating. She could hear it in the change of his tone, the shift from shocked brother to CEO mode. "No." Rachel admitted it, looking at the homeless man eyeing her suitcase a few yards away. He'd moved closer while she'd been on the phone. "I'm on the street. He kicked me out. He left me with nothing." "Who?" The word was a growl, low and dangerous. In the background, Rachel could hear a car door slam, an engine starting, the high-pitched whine of a jet turbine spinning up. Her brother was already moving heaven and earth. My husband. Derek Holloway. Vance. Nate repeated the name as if tasting poison. The architect. The one with the mid-rise buildings downtown. Yes. Stay exactly where you are. Share your location. Do not move. His voice had gone cold, calculated. This was Nathaniel Sterling, the man Forbes called the Ice King of Silicon Valley, the CEO who'd turned his parents' struggling tech startup into an $8.5 billion empire by age 35. This was the brother who'd promised 10 years ago that if she ever needed him, he'd come. No questions asked. Nate, I don't want to come back to the family. I just need a lawyer, a good one. You don't need a lawyer, Ellie. Nate's voice dropped even lower, and she could hear the car accelerating in the background, the growl of an engine pushed past legal speed limits. You need a war counsel, and you're getting one. There was a pause. She could hear him breathing, could picture him in the back of his Cadillac Escalade, probably already pulling up his phone to make calls to activate resources she'd forgotten existed. He says I signed a prenup. He says I get nothing. Nate laughed, a dark, terrifying sound that made Derek's earlier laugh seem like a child's giggle. This was the laugh of a man who'd destroyed competitors, who'd bankrupted corporate raiders, who'd won battles in boardrooms and courtrooms that lesser men didn't survive. He thinks he's playing checkers, Ellie. He has no idea he just flipped the board on a grandmaster. I've known about Vanessa Cross for 2 months. Rachel gasped, her breath catching in her throat. You knew I have a 3-inch file on her. I was waiting for you to see it. I couldn't interfere without breaking our agreement. But I never stopped watching. I have a security team that's monitored you every day for 10 years. Rachel's mind reeled. 10 years. While she'd been living in her small Capitol Hill apartment working at the Seattle Public Library for $38,000 a year, eating ramen and riding the bus, her brother had been watching from the shadows, protecting her even when she'd demanded he stay away. When your phone pinged on our system 5 minutes ago, I knew you were ready. I'm coming to get you. And God have mercy on Mr. Holloway, because I certainly won't. Rachel hung up. She slid down the brick wall of the coffee shop, sitting on her suitcase, and watched the rain fall. It washed over the street in waves, filling the gutters, overwhelming the drains. Somewhere across the city, Derek was probably in bed with Vanessa by now, celebrating his victory. He thought he'd discarded a nobody from nowhere. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. 47 minutes later, the headlights cut through the darkness. Not one car. 3 sleek, black Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows moving in a tight, predatory formation that forced the few taxis on the road to veer out of the way. They screeched to a halt in front of the coffee shop, the lead vehicle's door flying open before the wheels had fully stopped rolling. A man stepped out. He didn't run despite the downpour. He moved with terrifying precision, each step deliberate and controlled. He was tall, wearing a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit that likely cost more than the coffee shop's annual revenue. He ignored the puddles ruining his Cole Haan shoes, each step a statement that material things meant nothing compared to what mattered. Nate. Rachel stood up, her legs shaking. Nathaniel Sterling, CEO of Sterling Technology. The man who'd been on the cover of Fortune magazine last month with the headline, "The Ice King Cometh," closed the distance in 3 strides. He didn't look like a CEO in that moment. He looked like a brother who wanted to burn the world down. He pulled her into a crushing hug, burying his face in her wet, matted hair. I've got you. You're safe. You're safe now, Ellie. His voice was trembling, a rare display of emotion from a man known for his ice-cold negotiations and ruthless business tactics. He pulled back, gripping her shoulders, his eyes scanning her face. He saw the red-rimmed eyes, the hollowness in her cheeks, the cheap, soaked coat. His jaw tightened so hard, a muscle feathered beneath his ear. Did he hit you? The question came out dangerous and low, the kind of quiet that precedes violence. Number. He just broke me, Nate. He threw me out like I was garbage. Nate turned to the large men who had stepped out of the escort vehicles. 6 of them, all over 6 feet, all moving with military precision. Former Special Forces, now Sterling Security. Get her suitcase. Middle car with me. Call the pilot, we're not leaving tonight. Book the Fairmont Olympic penthouse floor, all of it, and get Dr. Reeves on the phone. I want her checked out within the hour." "Yes, Mr. Sterling." Marcus Chen, head of security, nodded and grabbed Rachel's battered suitcase with more respect than Derek had ever shown her. The team moved like a well-oiled machine surrounding Rachel and Nate, escorting them to the middle escalade. Inside the warmth of the SUV, surrounded by heated leather seats and the soft hum of the engine, Rachel finally broke down. She cried for the 3 years of lies. She cried for the baby she couldn't carry and the husband who blamed her for it. She cried for the fool she had been thinking she could escape her family's shadow and find someone who loved her, not her money. Nate sat beside her, holding her hand silently, letting her weep. He didn't offer platitudes or empty assurances. He simply handed her a silk handkerchief and waited. When the tears finally subsided, the car was moving smoothly through the Seattle streets, the wipers beating a steady rhythm against the rain. "I told you. 10 years ago I told you I wanted to be normal. I changed my name to Morgan. I wanted a life where people didn't look at me and see dollar signs." Rachel's voice was hoarse from crying, barely above a whisper. "And I respected that." Nate's voice was soft, careful. He hadn't spoken to his sister in a decade, and he was navigating the conversation like a man defusing a bomb. "I kept the family away. I let you live in that apartment. I let you work at the library. I even had our security team pull back so you wouldn't feel watched." He paused, his grip on her hand tightening. "But I never stopped the background checks." Rachel whipped her head around. "I knew about the Mistress, Ellie. You knew for 2 months. I have a file on Vanessa Cross that's 3 inches thick. I was waiting for you to see it. I couldn't interfere without breaking our agreement." He reached into the pocket of the seat in front of him and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen a few times and handed it to her. It was a live feed of the stock market focused on a specific sector: real estate and construction. "Derek thinks he's a big fish in Seattle. He just landed the contract for the new city stadium, right? That's what gave him the confidence to dump you today." Rachel nodded. Derek had been insufferable about that contract, bragging to everyone who would listen about how he'd beaten out 3 other firms. It was his golden ticket, he'd said. His legacy project. "It's not a ticket. It's a noose." Nate's voice was cold, clinical. This was the voice that had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, that had stared down corporate raiders and won. He leveraged everything to get that contract. His liquidity is non-existent. He's floating on loans mostly from Pacific Northwest Bank. Rachel looked at him, confusion clouding her tired eyes. "How do you know all this?" Nate offered a thin, cruel smile. "Because little sister Sterling Industries acquired Pacific Northwest Bank 2 weeks ago. The paperwork went through at 3 p.m. today, 10 minutes before I picked you up." Rachel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You bought his bank, I bought his debt. I own his mortgage. I own his business loans. I own the credit cards he uses to buy that Mistress her jewelry. Technically, as of 6 p.m. this evening, I own him." The car pulled up to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, its grand facade glowing in the rain. Doormen rushed to open the doors, holding oversized umbrellas that shielded Rachel and Nate from the downpour. "So we have 2 options." Nate helped Rachel out of the car, his hand steady on her elbow. "Option A, I foreclose on him tomorrow, ruin his credit, leave him destitute by lunch. It's fast. It's efficient." Rachel stood on the pavement, the rain no longer touching her under the umbrella held by a guard. She thought about Derek's laugh. She thought about the way he looked at his watch while he kicked her out. She thought about Vanessa moving into her home tomorrow morning, touching her things, erasing her existence. No. Rachel's voice hardened, something shifting deep inside her. That's too easy. He needs to feel it. He needs to stand in a court of law and think he's winning just so we can watch the hope leave his eyes. Nate grinned, and for the first time he looked truly happy. Option B it is, the slow burn. He led her through the hotel's gilded lobby, past marble columns and crystal chandeliers that reminded her of Derek's penthouse, except these felt warm, somehow welcoming. "Let's get you a hot shower and a meal. Tomorrow we go shopping. If you're going to war, Rachel, you need to look like a Sterling." 3 days later, Derek Vance stood in the center of his living room, a glass of Schramsberg sparkling wine in hand. The rain had stopped and the Seattle skyline was gleaming in the rare autumn sunshine. The penthouse looked different already. Vanessa had worked fast. "Babe, do you think this gray sectional works?" Vanessa called out from the newly redecorated space. She was already making it hers. Rachel's cozy vintage armchairs were gone, replaced by sharp modern furniture from an Italian designer whose name Derek couldn't pronounce, but whose prices he could definitely appreciate. "Whatever you want, V. You're the lady of the house now." Derek walked over to kiss her forehead. She was showing just slightly now, 4 months along her hand, constantly rubbing the small bump. He'd bought her a maternity wardrobe from Nordstrom last week. Nothing but the best for the mother of his heir. "I just don't want any of her bad vibes left." Vanessa pouted that little expression that Derek found adorable. Rachel had never pouted. Rachel had just gotten quieter and quieter until she'd practically disappeared. "Did she sign the papers yet?" "She will. She has no money, no family, nowhere to go. She's probably sleeping in a shelter right now." Derek scoffed, taking another sip of the sparkling wine. It was Californian from Napa Valley, the kind they served at White House dinners. He'd started buying it after landing the stadium contract. "She'll sign just to get the $5,000 relocation assistance I generously offered." The intercom buzzed, interrupting his self-congratulation. "Mr. Holloway, you've been served." Derek frowned. He set down his glass and walked to the intercom. "Send it up." Vanessa's eyes widened. "What's that about?" "Probably Rachel's confirmation that she's signing. Her lawyer probably wants to make it official." A few minutes later, a process server handed him a thick stack of documents. Derek ripped them open, expecting to see the signed, uncontested divorce papers. Instead, he saw bold black letters at the top. "Notice of contested divorce and countersuit for damages." What the hell? Derek scanned the document, his face turning red. Claims of fraud, intellectual property theft, emotional distress, a motion for emergency spousal support. She's contesting. On what grounds? He laughed, throwing the papers onto the new glass coffee table Vanessa had ordered from a boutique in Pioneer Square. "She's delusional. She hired some strip mall lawyer to scare me." He picked up his phone and dialed Silas Thorne, the best divorce attorney in Seattle. $950 an hour, but worth every penny. Silas had never lost a case. "Silas, my ex is trying to fight back. I saw the filing electronically, Derek. It's adorable." Silas's voice was smooth-bored, the tone of a man who'd seen this play out 1,000 times. They filed in King County Superior Court. Hearing is set for Friday. Emergency motion for spousal support. Spousal support. The prenup waives that exactly. Exactly. We'll walk into court, waive the prenup, and the judge will toss her case out in 10 minutes. It'll cost you 1 hour of my time at $9.50, but it'll be fun to watch her squirm. Derek could hear Silas typing in the background, probably billing him already. "Do you want to settle? Hell no." Derek's voice rose. Vanessa looked up from her phone, alarmed. "I want to crush her. I want her to stand there and listen while the judge tells her she's worthless. Friday at 9 a.m. then. Wear the Navy Tom Ford. Project's authority." Derek hung up and poured himself another glass. By Friday, this would all be over. Rachel would slink away embarrassed and broke, and he'd never have to think about her again. He looked out over the city, the Space Needle visible in the distance, the stadium site where his legacy project would rise. Everything was falling into place. What he didn't know was that at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, in a penthouse suite that occupied an entire floor, Rachel sat at a conference table surrounded by 7 lawyers, 3 forensic accountants, and a brother who was prepared to dismantle Derek's world brick by brick. Victoria Chang, former Department of Justice prosecutor and lead attorney from Morrison & Foerster, pulled up financial records on the screen. "Ms. Sterling, we've been working all night. Here's what we found." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes sharp and focused. She wasn't the broken woman who'd sat in the rain 3 days ago. She was wearing black Ralph Lauren slacks and a cream silk blouse, her hair pulled back in a professional chignon. Dr. Reeves had checked her out and declared her physically fine but emotionally traumatized. The trauma was being converted into fuel. 4 years ago, Mr. Holloway's Miami hotel project failed. He lost $2.3 million. He hid this debt using a Delaware shell corporation. Victoria clicked to the next slide. Bank statements, wire transfers, and corporation documents. When you signed the prenup 3 years ago, he swore under oath that he disclosed all assets and debts. He lied. Rachel felt something click in her mind. Prenup Article 9. If one party hides debts over $100,000, they forfeit 50% of marital appreciation. Victoria smiled. Exactly. You do remember contracts. One of the forensic accountants, a thin man named Robert with wire-rimmed glasses, pulled up email records. We also found these. The Seattle Stadium project Mr. Holloway won because of innovations in carbon footprint reduction and load-bearing optimization. He clicked to an email dated 18 months ago, from rachel.morgan.holloway@gmail.com to derek.holloway@hollowayarc.com. Subject: West Wing structural fix. Rachel's breath caught as she read her own words on the screen. Derek, you were passed out on scotch again. I ran the load calculations. Your initial design would have collapsed under snow load. I've attached revised CAD files using cross-laminated timber. It cuts carbon footprint by 40%, which is what the City Council wanted. You're welcome. Our Derek's reply below was 2 words. Thanks, babe. No credit, no acknowledgement. Just thanks. Rachel's hands shook as Robert scrolled through more emails. 47 of them over 18 months. Each one showed Rachel providing technical solutions, logistics optimization, carbon modeling, structural engineering that Derek had presented as his own work. He took credit for my work. Her voice was barely a whisper. For 18 months. Every innovation that won him the stadium contract came from you. Nate leaned back in his chair at the head of the table. Here's what we do tomorrow. We don't void the prenup. We enforce it. Derek committed fraud. Article 9 triggers. He forfeits 50% of company growth. But the real weapon. We prove his genius stadium design was your work. In front of everyone, we destroy his professional reputation. Rachel looked up, her eyes meeting her brother's. I want to speak in court. I want to look him in the eye. Victoria hesitated. Are you sure? It's emotionally, I'm sure. Rachel's voice was steel. He called me dull, called me a placeholder. I want him to hear me say how he stole from me. Nate nodded approval. Then we make you unforgettable. The next afternoon, Nate took Rachel to Nordstrom's private styling suite. A woman named Patricia greeted them with champagne and measuring tape. Mr. Sterling said, we're thinking power, elegance, untouchable. Patricia's assistant brought out options. Rachel tried on a cream Ralph Lauren power suit, the fabric so fine it felt like water. The jacket nipped at her waist, the shoulders strong and structured. The trousers fell in a perfect line to Stuart Weitzman pumps that added 3 inches to her height. Rachel looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Not the librarian in cardigans. Not the wife who'd made herself small to fit into Derek's world. This was Rachel Catherine Sterling, heiress to a fortune warrior preparing for battle. I look like a Sterling. You are a Sterling. You always were. You just forgot for a while. Nate stood behind her, his reflection beside hers in the mirror. On Friday morning, Rachel woke at 6. She dressed carefully in the cream suit. A stylist came to the hotel to blow out her hair in glossy waves. Minimal makeup, just enough to look polished, not enough to look like she was trying. She slid on the sunglasses, Tom Ford, oversized and dark. The final touch was the Michael Kors tote, structured leather in cream to match the suit. She looked at herself one final time. Derek had thrown away Rachel Morgan. He was about to meet Rachel Sterling. At 8:45, Derek walked into King County Superior Court feeling invincible. The navy Tom Ford suit fit perfectly. Silas Thorne beside him, gold iPad in hand, already planning his next case. This would take 10 minutes, 15 tops. Vanessa sat in the gallery behind him, white maternity dress playing her role perfectly. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Derek checked his Rolex. 9 o'clock. Where was Rachel's lawyer? The bailiff called order. Judge Maria Kincaid entered a stern Latina woman in her late 50s with a reputation for suffering no fools. Case number 4921, Holloway versus Holloway. Parties present. Silas stood buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Silas Thorne for Respondent Derek Marcus Holloway. Your Honor, motion to dismiss based on valid prenuptial agreement. Judge Kincaid looked at the plaintiff's table, and for the plaintiff, Mrs. Holloway. Rachel stood, her voice clear and steady. My counsel is just arriving, Your Honor. He had to clear security. Court starts at 9, Mrs. Holloway. If he's not here? The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with force. The room went silent. 5 lawyers marched down the center aisle in perfect formation, black Ralph Lauren suits, leather coach briefcases. But they weren't the main event. Leading them was a man who commanded the space like he owned it. 6'2", charcoal 3-piece Tom Ford suit, Tiffany cufflinks with the Sterling Technology logo. Nathaniel Sterling walked past Derek without a glance, as if Derek were furniture, and stood beside Rachel. His hand settled on her shoulder. Nathaniel James Sterling. Your Honor, representing the plaintiff, Rachel Catherine Sterling. The gasp that rippled through the courtroom was audible. The stenographer stopped typing. Judge Kincaid's eyebrows rose. Derek's face drained of all color. Sterling. The word fell from his lips like ash. He looked at Silas, whose hands were shaking as he frantically Googled on his iPad. When the search results loaded, the lawyer's face went white. Rachel Catherine Sterling. Heiress. Trust fund $680 million. Sister of Nathaniel Sterling, CEO Sterling Technology. Derek had married a billionaire and thrown her away like garbage. The war had begun, and he had no idea he'd already lost. Silas Thorne was no longer checking his email. The $950 an hour attorney stared at Nathaniel Sterling with the expression of a man who'd just realized he'd brought a pocket knife to a gunfight. His hands, normally steady from 2 decades of courtroom victories, trembled as he gripped his gold iPad. Your Honor, I wasn't aware Mr. Sterling was a licensed attorney in this state. The words came out strangled, desperate. Silas was scrambling now, looking for any procedural foothold that might save him. I'm licensed in New York, California, and Washington State. Mr. Thorne. Nate's voice was cool, almost bored. He pulled a crisp document from his coach briefcase and slid it across to the bailiff. My credentials, Your Honor, and my notice of appearance filed electronically at 6 a.m. this morning. Judge Kincaid reviewed the papers, her eyebrows climbing higher with each line she read. Harvard Law, top 1%. Admitted to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court. A resume that belonged to someone who argued constitutional cases, not divorce proceedings in King County. Mr. Sterling, your credentials are impressive. Welcome to my courtroom. The judge's tone carried a note of curiosity. Nathaniel Sterling didn't practice law. He ran an $8.5 billion empire. His appearance here meant something had gone very wrong for someone. Nate turned slowly to face Derek. The movement took 3 full seconds, deliberate and theatrical. When their eyes met, Derek felt ice water flood his veins. This wasn't the gaze of a lawyer. This was the stare of a predator that had cornered its prey and was deciding which bone to break first. Your Honor, for the record, the plaintiff's legal name is not Holloway. Nate addressed the judge but kept his eyes locked on Derek. She has filed to revert to her maiden name effective immediately. I believe the respondent knows it now. The pause stretched out excruciating. Or perhaps he never bothered to ask who his wife really was. Derek slumped back in his chair as if someone had cut his strings. He looked at Rachel, truly looked at her for the first time in years. The resemblance was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. The same aristocratic nose as Nate, the same sharp chin, the same intense focus in her eyes. Sterling. She was a Sterling, not some nobody librarian from Capitol Hill. The heiress to an empire that made his architecture firm look like a lemonade stand. And he'd told her to leave with nothing, called her garbage, kicked her suitcase across the floor. In the gallery, Vanessa's hand dropped from her belly. Her face had gone pale, makeup suddenly garish against bloodless skin. She'd gotten pregnant by a man who'd just destroyed a Sterling. The full weight of that realization settled over her like concrete. "Mr. Thorne, you filed a motion to dismiss. Proceed." Judge Kincaid's voice cut through the tension. She was watching this unfold with the keen interest of someone who'd seen thousands of cases but rarely saw anything new. Silas stood his tie already loosened, something Derek had never seen in 3 years of working with the man. Silas Thorne prided himself on his appearance, his control, his unflappable courtroom presence. "Your Honor, we assert that the prenuptial agreement signed by Ms. Sterling waives all claims to marital assets, spousal support, and property division. It's a standard document, ironclad in its language and enforceability." Derek leaned over, hissing in Silas's ear. "Why do you look terrified? It's just a name. She's still the same broke librarian. The prenup is solid." Silas didn't respond. He was staring at his notes like they might spontaneously combust. Nate didn't sit. He stood at the podium with the relaxed posture of a man who knew he'd already won and was simply enjoying the formality of the proceedings. "Your Honor, Mr. Thorne describes the prenuptial agreement as ironclad. It is anything but. It's a draconian document designed to exploit a spouse with less perceived power." Derek allowed himself a small smile. Nate was going to attack the prenup's validity. Good luck with that. Silas had drafted it specifically to withstand challenges. "However, we are not here to argue the fairness of the prenup." Derek's smile faltered. "We are here to enforce it." Nate opened his leather binder. One of his associates, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the bearing of a former prosecutor, handed a stack of documents to the bailiff. "Article 6, Section B of the prenuptial agreement states, and I quote, 'In the event of dissolution, both parties retain sole ownership of assets acquired prior to marriage and any inheritance received during marriage.'" Nate looked directly at Silas. "Is that correct, Mr. Thorne?" "Yes. That protects Derek's company." "Does it?" Nate's interruption was surgical precise, "because it also protects my client's assets. And since Ms. Sterling is the beneficiary of the Sterling family trust established when she turned 18, her personal assets at the time of signing this prenup were approximately—" he pretended to squint at the document, drawing out the moment— $680 million. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. A reporter in the back row began typing furiously on his phone. Derek gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Blood roared in his ears. "That's a lie." He was on his feet, shouting before he could stop himself. "She worked at a library. She wore thrift store clothes." "Sit down, Mr. Holloway, or I will hold you in contempt." Judge Kincaid's gavel hit the bench with a crack that echoed off the wood paneling. Derek sat, but his chest was heaving. This couldn't be happening. Rachel was poor. She was nobody. She was— "My client lives modestly, Your Honor." Nate's voice carried across the courtroom, calm and measured. "Some people don't need to scream about their wealth to know they have it. Unlike others." The barb landed. Derek felt it like a physical blow. Around the courtroom a few people nodded. The reporter smirked as he typed. "Now here's where it gets interesting for Mr. Holloway." Nate turned the page in his binder with deliberate slowness. "The prenup also contains a full financial disclosure clause. Article 12. Both parties swore under oath that they disclosed all assets and debts at time of signing. If one party lied, the agreement is voidable at the injured party's discretion." Silas shot to his feet, his desperation showing. "Objection. Relevance. Mr. Holloway disclosed everything in good faith." "Did he?" Nate didn't even look at Silas. He gestured to Victoria Chang, who stepped forward with a laptop. The screen behind the judge's bench flickered to life, projecting financial records for the entire courtroom to see. 4 years ago, Mr. Holloway invested $2.3 million in a Miami hotel development project through a Delaware shell corporation called Holloway Ventures, LLC. Bank statements appeared on the screen. Wire transfers. Incorporation documents. Each slide was damning in its clarity. The project failed. Completely. He lost every penny. When Ms. Sterling signed the prenup 3 years ago, Mr. Holloway swore under oath his company was solvent, He claimed ownership of the Obsidian Tower penthouse outright. More documents flashed up, mortgage statements, loan agreements. But these bank records subpoenaed this morning under emergency order show the penthouse was held by that same Delaware shell company, a company that was technically insolvent at time of signing due to the Miami disaster. A disaster Mr. Holloway conveniently left off his disclosure forms. Silas was flipping through the documents, sweat beading on his forehead despite the courtroom's air conditioning. Objection. Your Honor, the method by which these records were obtained, were these records obtained legally? Mr. Sterling emergency subpoena granted at 6 a.m. this morning by Judge Richardson. Signed warrant in your packet, Your Honor, page 47. Judge Kincaid flipped to the page, reviewed it with the speed of someone who'd read thousands of court documents. Warrant is valid. Objection overruled. Continue, Mr. Sterling. Nate leaned forward on the podium, his gaze finding Derek like a laser. Your Honor, since Mr. Holloway committed fraud to induce my client to sign that prenup, we could void the entire agreement. Derek's eyes widened. A flicker of hope sparked in his chest. If they voided the prenup, it would be a standard divorce. He'd still lose some assets, but he'd keep his company, his reputation. But we won't. The hope died. We choose to enforce the penalty clause. Article 9. Nate read aloud from the document, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. If either party is found to have hidden debts or liabilities exceeding $100,000 at time of signing, that party shall forfeit 50% of any marital appreciation of their primary business or asset to the other party as penalty for fraud. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mr. Holloway hid $2.3 million in debt. That's 23 times the threshold. His company, Holloway Architecture, has grown substantially over 3 years, mostly due to the Seattle Stadium contract he just won. Market valuation jumped from $8 million to $45 million. 50% of that appreciation is $18.5 million. We're suing for half his company. Derek couldn't breathe. Half his company. The firm he'd built from nothing. The reputation he'd spent 15 years cultivating. Gone. Because of a clause he'd never thought would apply to him. She's a librarian. The words tore out of his throat, raw and desperate. She knows nothing about architecture. She didn't contribute anything. Mr. Holloway, one more outburst and you will be removed from my courtroom. Sit down. Judge Kincaid's gavel struck again, the sound like a gunshot. Derek collapsed into his chair. Silas was whispering urgently in his ear something about settlement options, about damage control, but Derek couldn't process the words. His world was collapsing in real-time broadcast on a screen for everyone to see. Your Honor, my client would like to address the court. Nate stepped aside, making room at the podium. Rachel rose from her chair and Derek watched her move with a grace he'd never noticed before. Or maybe he'd never bothered to look. She stood beside her brother, not behind him. Equal. Ms. Sterling, you wish to speak. Judge Kincaid's tone had softened slightly. Even she seemed curious about what this woman who'd hidden her identity for a decade might say. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to address my former husband directly. Proceed. Rachel turned to face Derek. Their eyes met across the courtroom and Derek saw something in her gaze that made his stomach drop. Not anger, not hatred. Something worse. Pity mixed with steel. She looked at him the way someone might look at a spider they were about to crush, necessary but regrettable. Derek, who fixed the load-bearing calculations on the West Wing draft for the stadium project. Her voice was clear, steady, projecting to the back of the room without being loud. A librarian's voice trained to carry in large spaces. Derek's mouth opened. No sound came out. The night of November 12, 2023. You came home drunk on bourbon. Complained your design kept failing city engineering review. You passed out on the couch. Rachel's recitation was clinical, factual, devastating. I sat at your computer, ran your structural analysis software, found the error you'd used the wrong timber grade for Seattle snow load. I redesigned the entire support system using cross-laminated timber. Reduced carbon footprint by 40%. Which is the only reason the Seattle City Council approved your bid over 3 other firms. Victoria Chang pulled up an email on the screen behind Rachel. Derek recognized his own inbox, the conversation thread he'd deleted last year to make space for newer files. The email was from rachel.morgan.holloway@gmail.com, time-stamped 3:47 a.m. The subject line read, "Stadium fixes. Urgent. Derek, you were passed out. Your load calcs would have collapsed under first snow. Fixed it. CLT system attached. Submit this to City Council. You're welcome. R." His reply sent at 10:15 that morning. "Thanks, babe." 2 words. No credit. No acknowledgement. Not even her name mentioned when he'd presented to the City Council 3 days later. "For 18 months I provided technical solutions, logistics optimization, carbon modeling, structural engineering." Victoria scrolled through the emails. Derek watched his professional reputation disintegrate with each message. 47 emails over 18 months. Each one showed Rachel solving problems he'd claimed credit for solving. Each one ended with him replying thanks or good job or sometimes nothing at all. "You called me dull, Derek." Rachel's voice dropped intimate despite the public setting. "You said I had no ambition, no intelligence, no value. You threw my suitcase across the floor like trash." The courtroom was silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, caught up in the moment. "But I wasn't trash. I was the foundation of your success. And you were too arrogant to see it." Derek wanted to argue to defend himself, but what could he say? The evidence was right there on the screen. His company's biggest win had come from her work. Work he'd stolen. Work he'd built his reputation on. "Your Honor, we're not just suing for the penalty clause." Nate stepped forward again and Derek realized this had been choreographed. Brother and sister working in perfect sync. "We're suing for intellectual property theft. My client's contributions quantifiable, documented, essential to Mr. Holloway's stadium contract win, constitute joint authorship under Washington law. We're freezing all Holloway architecture assets pending forensic audit. We're demanding 50% equity transfer, plus legal fees." Nate paused, letting that sink in. Then he looked at Silas with something approaching sympathy. "And since my hourly rate is significantly higher than Mr. Thorne's, that's going to be an expensive bill." Judge Kincaid reviewed the evidence spread before her. Bank records showing Derek's fraud, emails proving Rachel's contributions, the prenup with its penalty clause. Derek's face now ash-pale and sweating. Her gavel came down. Motion to dismiss denied. Temporary restraining order on all Holloway architecture assets granted. Mr. Holloway, you are to provide full access to your corporate books to Mr. Sterling's forensic accounting team by 5 p.m. today. Silas made a strangled sound. "Your Honor, that's in 6 hours. Then you better start making copies, Mr. Thorne." Court adjourned until Monday 9 a.m. for full evidentiary hearing. The gavel struck one final time. The courtroom erupted. Reporters sprinted for the doors, phones already at their ears, calling editors. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations. Derek sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Rachel and Nate turned to leave. Their security team materialized, creating a path through the crowd. Rachel walked past Derek without a glance. She'd made her point. She was done looking at him. Derek watched her go, this woman he'd thrown away. She moved like royalty, now shoulders back, head high. The cheap cardigan and sneakers were gone, replaced by a power suit and confidence that seemed to radiate from her. She was everything he'd wanted Vanessa to be. Polished, poised, powerful. And he'd never seen it because he'd been too busy looking down at her to notice she was standing on top of a mountain. "Derek." Silas's voice finally penetrated the fog. "We need to talk about settlement." "No." Derek's voice was hoarse. "No settlement. I'll fight this. It's my company. Mine." But even as he said the words, he knew they rang hollow. The evidence was irrefutable. The emails, the bank records, the prenup he'd foolishly agreed to in his arrogance. He'd built his own trap and walked right into it. Outside the courthouse, the media circus was in full swing. Cameras flashed like lightning strikes, microphones thrust forward like weapons, questions bombarded from every direction. "Ms. Sterling, is it true you're the Sterling technology heiress?" "Derek, did you know your wife was a billionaire?" Mr. Sterling? What's your next move? Vanessa. Is the baby. Really? Nate's security team moved like a military unit, creating a corridor through the chaos. Rachel walked down the center, sunglasses back on face, impassive. She didn't answer questions. She didn't need to. Her silence was more powerful than any statement. They reached the lead escalade. A guard held the door. Rachel slid inside with the ease of someone who'd grown up with chauffeurs and security details. Nate followed and the door closed on the shouting reporters. Derek tried to exit through a side entrance. He made it 3 steps before being ambushed. Cameras in his face. Questions shouted over each other. He pushed through, shoving a microphone aside, his face contorted with panic. Vanessa trailed behind him, and Derek saw the exact moment she realized her life had just imploded. A reporter asked if she'd known about Rachel's identity. Another asked if she felt guilty. A third, more vicious, asked if she was worried about raising a child alone after Derek lost everything. Derek's Tesla was in the parking garage. He reached it, hands shaking so badly he couldn't unlock it with the key fob. Had to use his phone. Finally got inside. Vanessa climbed into the passenger seat without asking. What does this mean? Does she really get half the company? Her voice was high, thin, scared. Shut up, Vanessa. Derek slammed his palm against the steering wheel. Just shut up. It's smoke and mirrors. I'm the architect. I'm the talent. They can't touch me. But his hands were trembling on the wheel. He pulled out of the parking garage too fast, tires squealing, and headed toward his office. He needed to move money, shred documents, hide the evidence of the Miami disaster, call his accountant, call his bank, call someone who could fix this. The offices of Holloway Architecture occupied 3 floors of a glass building on 5th Avenue. Derek had signed the lease 2 years ago, riding high on 3 consecutive successful projects. The rent was astronomical, but he'd justified it as necessary for the image. Clients expected their architect to project success. He burst through the lobby doors expecting the usual hum of activity. Instead, he found silence. 4 people in dark suits stood in the center of the reception area. FBI badges clipped to their belts. They were boxing up files, computers, hard drives. Everything. What is this? Who are you people? Derek's voice came out strangled. A woman stepped forward, late 50s, gray hair pulled back, severe eyes that had seen every trick in the book. Mr. Holloway, I'm Agent Sarah Miller, Forensic Audit Division. We're here on behalf of the court-appointed receiver. Receiver, I own this building. Not anymore, sir. Agent Miller pulled out a document, held it up like a warrant. Pacific Northwest Bank has called in your loans. Commercial mortgage on this property. Line of credit used for payroll. Equipment leasing agreements. All of it. They can't do that without 30 days' notice. They can if there's a material adverse change in the borrower's financial status. The asset freeze issued by Judge Kincaid 1 hour ago constitutes material adverse change. Bank is exercising its right to immediate repayment under Section 7.3 of your loan agreement. Derek's mind reeled. Pacific Northwest Bank. Nate's voice from last night echoed in his memory, something Rachel must have told him. Sterling Industries acquired Pacific Northwest Bank 2 weeks ago. The trap wasn't just the prenup. Nate had bought the ground Derek stood on, then pulled it out from under him. David, Derek's CFO, appeared from the hallway carrying a box of personal items. David Chen had worked for Derek for 8 years, had been his right hand through every major project. David, tell them we have cash reserves. We can pay the loans. David wouldn't meet his eyes. We don't. Derek, you spent the reserves on the penthouse renovations and the engagement ring. Every head in the lobby turned to look at Vanessa's left hand. The 5-carat diamond caught the overhead light sparkling obscenely. $180,000 purchased 3 months ago when Derek had been certain the stadium contract would make him a multimillionaire. It didn't look like a symbol of love anymore. It looked like evidence of embezzlement. I'm resigning, Derek. Effective immediately. David's voice was quiet but firm. I can't be part of a fraud investigation. I have a family. You coward. Derek lunged forward. 2 FBI agents stepped between them. I made you, gave you a job when no one else would. You used us, Derek. David's composure cracked, showing anger underneath. All of us. We worked 80-hour weeks while you took credit. You stole your wife's work. You defrauded investors. I'm done. David walked out. Through the glass doors, Derek could see other employees leaving too. His head architect, Sarah Martinez. His lead designer, Tom Williams. The junior staff who'd looked up to him. One by one, they filed out with boxes of personal belongings, abandoning the sinking ship. Derek turned to his office. A security guard, one he didn't recognize, probably sent by Sterling, blocked the door. Access denied, Mr. Holloway. This is my office. Not until the audit is complete, sir. Court order. Please escort yourself out or we'll assist you. Derek backed away, chest heaving. He looked around the lobby he'd designed himself, the minimalist aesthetic he'd been so proud of. Now it felt like a mausoleum. Vanessa was by the elevator, texting furiously. Derek caught a glimpse of her screen before she tilted it away. She was texting her sister in Portland, making plans, asking about the spare bedroom. Vanessa, come on. We'll go to the lake house. Figure this out. We're together. We're having a son. Vanessa looked up. The adoration was gone from her eyes, replaced by cold calculation. She'd fallen for Derek because he was successful, powerful, wealthy. She'd seen him as her ticket to the life she wanted. Now she was looking at a man who'd just lost everything. The lake house. The one you said was in your name. Her voice was ice. Or is that owned by a shell company too? It's complicated. But we're a family. I need security, Derek. She cut him off. You promised me luxury, no drama, a life of ease. She gestured at the FBI agents, the empty desks where his employees used to work. This is not luxury. This is a felony. The elevator arrived. Vanessa stepped toward it. I'm going to my sister's in Portland. Don't call me until you fix this. You're carrying my heir, my son. Derek's voice cracked with desperation. Vanessa's hand went to her stomach. She looked down at the small bump, then back at Derek. I'm carrying a liability. The elevator doors closed. Derek stood alone in the lobby of his empire. The phone at the reception desk started ringing. Line 1, line 2, line 3, all simultaneously. Reporters probably, or clients calling to terminate contracts, or creditors demanding payment. Agent Miller approached with a clipboard. Mr. Holloway, we need you to sign acknowledging receipt of the court order. Then you'll need to leave the premises. Derek's phone buzzed. Email notification. His hand shook as he pulled it out. The subject line made his blood run cold. Settlement offer. Sterling Industries legal. He opened it knowing it would be bad, not knowing how bad. Mr. Holloway. Sterling Industries is willing to drop fraud charges and cease pursuit of criminal penalties under the following non-negotiable terms. Derek's eyes skimmed down. Each line was a fresh knife wound. Sign uncontested divorce papers immediately. Publicly admit stadium design was primarily Rachel Sterling's work. Resign as CEO of Holloway Architecture. Transfer controlling interest, 51% equity, to Rachel Catherine Sterling. Then he saw the consideration line, $1. They wanted to buy his life's work for $1. 15 years of sweat and sacrifice. His name on buildings across Seattle. His reputation as one of the city's most promising young architects. All of it for a single dollar bill. You have 1 hour to respond. The email was signed by Nathaniel Sterling himself, not some junior attorney. The CEO of an $8.5 billion empire had personally drafted Derek's destruction. Derek stumbled out to the street. Rain was starting again, light drizzle that would turn into a downpour by evening. He pulled out his phone, opened a news app. Trending #1 Holloway fraud. The Seattle Times had already published a story. The headline screamed across his screen. Billionaire heiress, hidden as librarian. Architect husband accused of IP theft. His photo looked like a mugshot, eyes wide, mouth open, mid-shout, from when he'd yelled in court. Rachel's photo showed her in the cream suit, sunglasses on, looking like she owned the world. Because she did. The subhead was worse. Sterling Family Trust heiress emerges from decade of anonymity to reclaim stolen work. Derek sat down on the curb, rain soaking through his Tom Ford suit. He pulled up Twitter. The tweets were brutal. This architect really kicked out a $680 million heiress thinking she was broke main character syndrome. Bro really thought he could gaslight a Sterling. Imagine stealing your wife's work and then divorcing her for being dull. Karma is real. The comments went on for miles. Memes were already being created, screenshots of the court documents, side-by-side comparisons of Derek's claims versus Rachel's emails. Internet detectives had found his Instagram and were tearing apart every post, every caption, looking for more evidence of his narcissism. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. Mr. Holloway, this is Channel 7 News. We'd like to offer you an opportunity to tell your side of the story. Derek hung up. It rang again immediately. Different reporter. He turned off his phone. The rain intensified. Derek sat on the curb outside what used to be his building, watching his world dissolve. An hour ago, he'd been on top, master of his universe. Now he had nothing. No company, no wife, no mistress, no heir, no reputation, no future. All because he'd underestimated the quiet woman in the cardigan. Saturday morning, 10 a.m., Morrison and Forster conference room. Derek sat alone at the massive mahogany table. Silas Thorne had recused himself that morning, citing potential malpractice liability. His malpractice insurance wouldn't cover a case this catastrophic. Derek was unrepresented now, facing the Sterling legal team solo. The door opened. Rachel walked in first, wearing a black Ralph Lauren suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Derek's funeral. Nate followed, closing the door behind them. No army of lawyers this time. They didn't need the intimidation factor anymore. Rachel walked to the head of the table. The power position. She placed a single document on the polished wood. Beside it, a Tiffany Sterling silver pen engraved with initials R.C.S. Derek looked up. His eyes were bloodshot from no sleep. His navy suit was rumpled, wrinkled from being slept in. He'd aged a decade overnight. Rachel, please, we can work this out. You loved me once. We can start over. Couples therapy. I'll change. I'll go to counseling. I loved the man I thought you were, Derek. Rachel's voice was soft, almost gentle. That made it worse somehow. I loved the man who told me he wanted to build things that lasted, things that mattered. She paused, and Derek saw something in her expression that broke him more than anger would have. Pity. But you don't build, Derek. You just take. You took my work, my confidence, my home. You tried to take my dignity. Derek stood, hands gripping the table edge. I was under pressure. The market was crashing. I needed the stadium deal to save us, to give us a future. I did it for. Don't. Nate's voice cracked like a whip. One word, but the force behind it made Derek flinch. Don't insult her intelligence. You didn't do it for her. You did it for your ego, so you could buy a bigger boat, join the right country club, replace your wife with a younger model who looked better in photos. Derek slumped back into his chair. If I sign this, I have nothing. My reputation is destroyed. I'll never work in this city again. I'll be nobody. Rachel pulled out her phone, showed him the screen. Twitter, news articles, his professional destruction cataloged in real time. Your reputation is already destroyed, Derek. The American Institute of Architects suspended your license this morning pending ethics investigation. Seattle City Council is reviewing whether to void your stadium contract. 3 former clients filed suit yesterday for breach of contract. She set the phone down. It's over. Rachel tapped the document. This is mercy. You sign. Nate calls off the forensic team. No criminal referrals to SEC or FBI. You avoid jail for bank fraud. You walk away free. Broke, but free. Her eyes met his. Or we go to trial. And I promise you we will destroy you. Not just financially. We'll investigate every project, every client, every expense report. We'll find every lie. And we'll make it public. And, Vanessa, The baby. Derek's voice was barely a whisper. Nate checked his watch. Vanessa Cross called my office 47 minutes ago. She's cutting a deal. Trading information on your offshore accounts for immunity from prosecution as accessory to fraud. He let that sink in. She's also terminating the pregnancy. Appointments Tuesday in Portland. Derek's world shattered completely. The heir he'd wanted, the son, the legacy, gone. Vanessa had chosen self-preservation over loyalty, just like everyone else. She's not coming back, Derek. The silence in the conference room was absolute. Derek stared at the document. Transfer of ownership. Consideration $1. His hand reached for the pen. It trembled so violently he could barely hold it. But he signed. His signature was barely legible ink blotching where his hand shook. He pushed the document toward Rachel. She reached into her bag, pulled out a $1 bill, not crisp and new, old, worn soft from years of circulation. She slid it across the mahogany table. Here. Derek stared at George Washington's face on the bill. Take it. Rachel's voice was a command, not a request. Derek's hand reached out. The dollar felt like it was burning his palm. Get out. Nate's voice was quiet, final. Derek stood, walked to the door. His footsteps echoed in the silent room. He paused with his hand on the handle, looked back. What are you going to do with the company? His voice was pathetic, grasping for relevance. You're a librarian. You don't know how to run a firm. Rachel smiled, a genuine bright smile that transformed her face. I'm not going to run it, Derek. I'm going to dismantle it. And then I'm going to build something real, something that lasts, something that actually helps people. Derek walked out. The elevator was waiting. He stepped inside. The doors closed. He descended into obscurity. 1 year later. Tuesday morning, 5:30 a.m. The alarm clock on the floor buzzed with a harsh metallic rattle that vibrated against thin linoleum. Derek Holloway rolled off the mattress, his back seizing in protest. No frame, just a box spring on the floor of a studio apartment in Renton, 20 miles from downtown Seattle. The air smelled of stale instant coffee and the damp Pacific Northwest that seeped through the single-pane window overlooking a parking lot. He dressed in the dark. Carhartt work pants stiff with drywall dust. Flannel shirt from Goodwill, $4 the elbows worn through. Steel toe boots that pinched his toes, bought second-hand from a construction worker who'd moved to Alaska. No Italian leather, no Tom Ford suits hanging in a climate-controlled closet. Those were gone sold to pay the settlement's legal fees that had exceeded even Nate Sterling's astronomical hourly rate. Derek checked his pockets. Keys to the studio, bus pass with 3 rides left until Friday's paycheck, and folded in the deepest corner of his wallet, a crumpled dollar bill he couldn't bring himself to spend. George Washington's face stared at him every time he opened it, a reminder of what hubris cost. He drank his coffee black, standing over the rust-stained sink. The mirror above showed a man who'd aged beyond his 39 years. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, scoured away by 8 months of sobriety and twice-weekly AA meetings at the Lutheran Church on Rainier Avenue. In its place sat permanent exhaustion, the kind that came from manual labor, and the weight of consequences that never lifted. Derek was sober now. Had to be. The court-mandated counseling after his DUI 3 months post-divorce had given him a choice: treatment or jail. He'd chosen treatment. Barely. Some nights he still dreamed of the Woodford Reserve, the burn of it, washing away shame. Those nights he called his sponsor a former electrician named Mike, who'd lost his family to alcoholism and rebuilt his life one day at a time. The commute took 90 minutes. 2 buses through neighborhoods he'd once driven past without seeing. He sat in the back hat, pulled low, avoiding eye contact with other early morning workers. He used to be the man in the back of a town car reading the Wall Street Journal on an iPad, impatient with traffic. Now he was the traffic. Another body taking up space on public transit, another faceless laborer heading to a job site. Derek worked framing now. $22 an hour for Allied Construction, a mid-size firm that specialized in apartment complexes and commercial renovations. His boss, Frank Morales, was an ex-convict who'd served 8 years for manslaughter, a bar fight gone wrong when he was 23. Frank gave second chances to people society had discarded. He'd hired Derek after a 10-minute interview where Derek had been honest about everything: the divorce, the fraud, the fall from grace. "You know how to read blueprints?" Frank had asked, studying Derek across a desk covered in permit applications and coffee stains. "Yes." "You show up on time?" "Yes." "You gonna steal from me or lie to my clients?" "No." Frank had nodded once. "You start Monday, 6 a.m. Don't be late." Derek hadn't been late once in 8 months. Today was different, though. Derek knew he shouldn't go, but he couldn't stop himself. Pure masochism, like pressing on a bruise to remember it was real. He got off the bus at 4th and Pike, 6 blocks from where he needed to be. 6 blocks from the construction site that was supposed to be Holloway Millennium Tower, his monument to ambition, his glass needle that would have pierced the sky and immortalized his name. The structure was complete now, but transformed. Derek stood across the street, collar turned up against the autumn wind. The building was lower than his design had called for, warmer somehow. The sharp, aggressive angles he'd sketched, all glass and steel and dominance, had been softened. The facade wasn't cold, reflective panels. It was reclaimed wood from demolished warehouses arranged in patterns that caught the light. Living green walls climbed 3 stories, plants breathing with the city's rhythm. Solar panels on the roof. Rainwater collection systems visible through strategic windows. Every detail screamed sustainability, community purpose. A massive banner stretched between 2 oak trees planted where his parking garage entrance would have been. Grand opening. The Nathaniel Sterling Community Center and Public Library, built from the ashes of greed, rising as a beacon of hope. She'd kept his name on the project permits buried in the fine print where the city required it. But she'd redefined what that name meant. Holloway was no longer synonymous with luxury condos for tech millionaires. It was associated with a free library, a legal aid clinic, job training programs, and community spaces that asked nothing of the people who needed them most. She'd turned his brand into charity, transmuted his ego into service. The crowd gathering for the opening wasn't the crowd Derek used to court. No tech executives in Patagonia vests, no investors calculating ROI. These were real people, students with backpacks heavy with textbooks they couldn't afford to buy. Elderly couples holding hands, remembering when this neighborhood had community centers before developers like Derek had tried to price them out. Young mothers pushing strollers, grateful for a safe place with air conditioning and free Wi-Fi. Teenagers in hoodies looking for somewhere that wasn't the street. The excitement was genuine. Derek had hired PR firms to manufacture this kind of buzz for his openings, spending $50,000 on influencers and catered events and champagne fountains. This crowd had come because they needed what the building offered. That was the difference between building monuments and building foundations. Then Derek saw her. Rachel walked onto the raised plaza, and Derek's breath stopped in his chest. She looked different. Not just the expensive clothes she'd always been able to afford, those he realized now. It was the way she carried herself. The tension that had lived in her shoulders during their marriage, the constant bracing for his next criticism, was gone. She moved like someone who'd set down a weight she'd been carrying for years. Her hair caught the wind, loose and natural. She was laughing at something the man beside her had said. Derek squinted against the morning sun. The man was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses, not sharp like Nate, soft around the edges in a way that suggested kindness came naturally. He looked like a professor. Later, Derek would learn his name was Dr. Ethan Cole, taught American literature at the University of Washington, specialized in 20th century poetry. Widower. Lost his wife to cancer 2 years before meeting Rachel at the library, where she'd returned to volunteer after the divorce. A good man who loved Rachel for who she was, not what she represented. Ethan's hand rested on the small of Rachel's back, casual and intimate. A wedding ring glinted on her left hand. Simple platinum, nothing ostentatious. Nothing like the 3-carat monstrosity Derek had bought her, selected by a jeweler based on what would photograph well. Then Derek noticed Rachel's other hand resting on her stomach. The cashmere coat she wore couldn't hide the curve. 7 months pregnant, Derek would later calculate. Glowing with it. His chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. Vanessa had terminated the pregnancy 2 weeks after the courthouse, texting him a photo of the clinic receipt like it was a weapon. She'd moved to Los Angeles, last he heard, engaged to a film producer who'd optioned her life rights for a true crime podcast about the Sterling scandal. She was monetizing Derek's destruction. But Rachel was building a family, creating the life Derek had promised her and never delivered. The mayor stepped to the microphone and the crowd quieted. Derek recognized Mayor Sandra Chen from her campaign photos, a former city councilwoman who'd run on affordable housing and community development. Welcome to a new chapter for Seattle, a chapter written by a woman who understands that shelter isn't just about walls, but about the communities those walls protect. Applause rippled through the crowd. The mayor gestured to Rachel, who stepped forward. Someone adjusted the microphone down to her height. "A year ago, I was told I didn't fit into this city's future." Rachel's voice carried across the plaza, amplified but natural. Derek shrank behind a street lamp, his high-visibility vest and hard hat making him invisible among the construction workers on their morning break. "I was told that worth is measured by what you can take, how much you can accumulate, how high you can build your tower above everyone else." She paused, and her eyes seemed to scan the crowd. For a heart-stopping moment, Derek thought she'd spotted him, but her gaze moved on. "But I learned something different. Worth is measured by what you can give. This building was built on the ruins of a mistake. We tore down ego to build a foundation for everyone." Rachel gestured to the structure behind her, and Derek saw his design bones in it, the column placement he'd calculated, the entrance flow he'd mapped. But everything else was hers. Better, more human. This library is for the student who needs a quiet place to dream. This legal aid clinic is for the partner who needs a way out of a bad situation. This job training center is for the person who made mistakes and deserves a second chance. Her hand touched her belly briefly, unconsciously protective. "This is for you." The applause was deafening. Not polite charity gala clapping. A roar of approval, standing ovation, genuine gratitude from people who'd been waiting for someone to remember they existed. Derek had built towers his entire career. He'd never built anything that made people react like this. An elderly woman standing near Derek holding grocery bags smiled at the stage. "She's amazing, isn't she? She saved this neighborhood." The woman's voice carried the accent of someone who'd immigrated. Young, worked hard, stayed put while the city changed around her. That developer Holloway tried to bulldoze the community garden to build luxury condos. $4,500 a month for a studio. Who can afford that? She shook her head. "I heard he's bankrupt. In jail, maybe. Good riddance to bad people." Derek pulled his collar higher. "Yeah, good riddance." On stage, Nate stepped forward. Still formidable at 40, still radiating the authority of someone who controlled billions. But there was softness in his expression as he looked at his pregnant sister. He handed her oversized ceremonial scissors. Rachel cut the ribbon. A jazz band struck up horns bright in the morning air. Confetti biodegradable, made from recycled paper because of course it was rained down. The crowd surged forward, eager to explore, to use, to inhabit the space that had been built for them. Derek turned away. He couldn't watch the joy anymore. It was too bright, and he was too dark. His boots were heavy on the pavement as he walked toward the bus stop that would take him to the actual job site where he was expected in 30 minutes. He passed a high-end furniture store, the kind he used to shop at, with Vanessa picking out pieces based on what would impress clients. His reflection caught in the window. A tired, middle-aged laborer in worn clothes, nothing to his name but a bad back and a story nobody would believe if he told it. Derek pulled out the dollar bill, smoothed it against the glass. Transfer of ownership. Consideration $1. The price of his company, yes. But also the price of his arrogance. The value Rachel had placed on his threats, his power, his years of taking credit for work that wasn't his. He'd lost more than money. He'd been erased. Not destroyed. Destruction implied she'd cared enough to hate him. Rachel had outgrown him, turned his malice into mulch and grown a garden over it. The building behind him was proof. She'd taken his worst impulses and composted them into something that fed hundreds of people. A homeless man sat on a crate near the corner shaking a cup. Spare change. Brother Derek looked at the man, looked at the dollar in his hand. His last dollar until Friday's direct deposit. He needed it for lunch, a sandwich from the food truck near the construction site. But the weight of the bill in his hand felt like carrying a stone. He dropped it in the cup. "God bless you, man." Derek's voice came out rough. "Don't. It's not worth anything." He walked to the bus stop, blending into the gray morning crowd. Another invisible body in a city of 700,000, disappearing into the background of a world he'd once believed he owned. Back on the plaza, the crowd was dispersing into the community center, streaming through doors into warmth and possibility. Nate walked to Rachel, handed her a water bottle. "You okay?" His eyes scanned the perimeter, habit from a decade of having security teams monitor his sister without her knowledge. Security said they spotted someone matching his description. Southeast corner 4th and Pike. Rachel took a sip, looked toward the corner where Derek had stood. The street was empty now, just Tuesday morning traffic and construction workers on break. "I know. I felt him watching." "Want me to have him removed?" "Restraining order by lunch." Nate's voice carried the edge of someone prepared to weaponize the legal system at a moment's notice. Rachel shook her head, a small, sad smile crossing her face. "Number. Let him watch. Let him see what real power looks like." She placed a hand on her brother's arm. "He's in a prison of his own making. Walls made of regret. There's no parole for that." Nate studied his sister, this woman who'd hidden from her family for a decade, who'd survived Derek's cruelty, who'd reclaimed her name and built something lasting. "You're better than he deserved. Always were, even when you were hiding in that library." "I wasn't hiding." Rachel's correction was gentle. "I was reading, learning, growing. And I learned that every villain is just a hero who forgot how to love." Ethan approached, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate from the refreshment station volunteers had set up. Steam rose from the cups into the cool air. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Sterling family, the hot chocolate stand is open, and they have marshmallows." Rachel laughed, the sound clear and unburdened. She accepted the cup, her wedding ring catching the light. She'd married Ethan 6 months ago in a small ceremony at the courthouse, the same courthouse where she'd faced Derek. Nate had walked her down the aisle. Their parents dead for 15 years in a plane crash that had thrust Nate into leadership too young would have approved of Ethan. He made Rachel happy in a quiet, steady way that didn't demand she be anything other than herself. "Well, Mrs. Cole, since you're Philanthropist of the Year and carrying my future nephew," Rachel corrected with certainty. The ultrasound last week had confirmed it. A boy. She'd already picked the name Lucas James Cole. Lucas for light, James for her father. "You're buying lunch?" Rachel grinned at her brother. "Deal. But we're going to that taco truck on 3rd. I've been craving fish tacos for 3 days straight." Nate raised an eyebrow, the gesture identical to one their father used to make. "I was thinking canless. Michelin star. Proper celebration for what you've built here. Tacos, Nate. It's a democracy now." Ethan laughed. "You're outvoted Mr. Sterling. She's been talking about these tacos since Saturday. They walked down the steps together. Brother who'd brought thunder and armies of lawyers. Sister who'd brought rain that washed away old foundations. Husband who'd brought love that asked nothing but gave everything. Behind them, the community center hummed with life, with purpose, with the kind of legacy that couldn't be measured in dollars or square footage. 5 years later, Tuesday afternoon. The Rachel Sterling Community Center bustled with its usual controlled chaos. In the children's library section, Rachel sat cross-legged on a colorful carpet reading The Giving Tree to a circle of 15 kids between ages 4 and 8. Her son Lucas, now 5 years old, sat beside her playing quietly with wooden blocks while his mother read. The walls were painted soft yellow murals of diverse children reading in gardens and on mountains and in space. Natural light poured through skylights. Derek's original design would never have included. He'd believed in dramatic artificial lighting and control. This space breathed. Once there was a tree, and she loved a little boy. Rachel's voice carried the rhythm of someone who'd read this story 100 times to her son and to other people's children. The book was worn pages soft from constant use. Lucas looked up at his mother with the kind of trust that came from being consistently loved. He had Ethan's gentle eyes and Rachel's sharp chin. A good kid, teachers said. Curious, kind patient with younger children. In the adjacent workshop room, visible through glass partitions that let parents keep sight of kids, Derek Holloway taught basic carpentry to a group of 8 teenagers. The workshop smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. Derek's hands, scarred from 4 years of construction work, guided a 16-year-old named Miguel through measuring a 2x4. Measure twice, cut once. Anyone tell me why Miguel, tongue between his teeth in concentration, answered, "Because you can't uncut wood." Exactly. In carpentry and in life you can't take back what you destroy. So you think before you act. Derek's voice was softer than it used to be, worn smooth by time and consequences. I learned that the hard way. The teens didn't know who Derek used to be. They knew him as Mr. Derek, the volunteer carpenter who showed up every Tuesday and Thursday, who was patient when they made mistakes, who brought extra supplies from construction sites his boss said were going to waste anyway. Derek had been volunteering at the center for 6 months. The path that led him here had been long and humbling. After the divorce, after the DUI, after losing his construction job to another relapse, Derek had hit a bottom beneath the bottom he'd thought existed. He'd ended up in a men's shelter run by the Lutheran Church, sleeping in a room with 11 other men who'd lost everything to various combinations of addiction, mental illness, and catastrophically bad decisions. The shelter had a bulletin board. Someone had pinned a flyer, "Community Center seeks volunteers. Second chances welcome." Derek had called the number expecting rejection. Instead, he'd gotten an interview with a community coordinator named Sarah, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd asked about his skills. He'd been honest architecture degree, 15 years of experience, all of it tainted by fraud and theft. Sober 8 months. Attending AA, working on amends. Sarah had studied him for a long moment. "We have a carpentry program for at-risk youth, kids who need to learn a trade. Can you teach them?" Yes. She'd pulled out a form. "This is a volunteer position, no pay, but you'd be giving back, making amends like you said." 3 weeks later, Derek had received a letter on Rachel Sterling Community Center letterhead. "Mr. Holloway, we'd like to offer you a volunteer position teaching carpentry to our youth program. No compensation, but an opportunity to contribute to your community. Please report to Sarah Matthews, program coordinator, if you accept. R.S. Rachel's initials. She'd known. Of course she'd known. The center probably flagged his name the moment he'd applied, and instead of rejecting him, she'd offered him a chance. Derek had cried reading that letter, sat on his shelter bunk and wept like he hadn't since his father's funeral 20 years ago. Now, 4 months into the program, Derek showed up on time, prepared lessons, brought encouragement and patience he'd never shown his own employees. The kids didn't care about his past. They cared that he listened when they talked about their lives, that he celebrated when they got measurements right, that he never made them feel stupid for not knowing things they'd never been taught. Class ended at 3. Derek cleaned up sweeping sawdust, putting tools away in locked cabinets. Through the glass partition he could see Rachel finishing story time. She helped kids put books back on shelves, practiced the librarian's care for materials that had defined her before Derek had ever met her. Their eyes met through the glass. Brief acknowledgement, not hostile, not friendly, just 2 people who'd once destroyed each other and were now existing in adjacent spaces doing separate work toward the same goal. Derek nodded. Rachel returned it. That was the extent of their interaction. They hadn't spoken directly in 5 years. After the kids left, Lucas approached Derek's workshop. The boy stood in the doorway, uncertain. "Mr. Derek." Derek looked up from organizing drill bits. "Hey, Lucas, you need something? Mama says you made mistakes, but you're trying to be better." The statement was delivered with the blunt honesty of a 5-year-old who hadn't learned to soften truth yet. "That's right. Did you say sorry?" Lucas's question was genuine curious. Derek set down the drill bits and knelt to the boy's eye level. "Yes. And more importantly, I'm showing sorry by helping others. That's what real apologies look like. Not just words, but actions." Lucas considered this, his small face serious. "Like when I broke Mia's toy and I helped her build a new one?" "Exactly like that." Lucas nodded, satisfied with this answer, and ran back to where Rachel was gathering their things to leave. Derek stood slowly, his knees protesting. He was 44 now, but felt 60 on days when the weather changed and his construction injuries flared up. He watched Lucas jump into his mother's arms, watched Rachel spin him. Once watched the family. Rachel, Ethan. Lucas and Rachel's daughter Lily, 2 years old, being pushed in a stroller by Ethan, leave through the main entrance. A family Derek could have had if he'd been different, if he'd valued what he had instead of what he wanted, if he'd built instead of taken. That evening, Derek took the bus back to his apartment. Not the studio in Renton anymore. He'd moved 6 months ago to a 1-bedroom in Columbia City, closer to the center, closer to his construction jobs. The apartment was small but clean, with a kitchen that worked and hot water that didn't run out. He'd furnished it from Goodwill and estate sales. Nothing matched, but it was his. He made dinner. Chicken breast rice, frozen vegetables. Simple food that fueled work. He ate standing at the counter, looking out the window at the street below. Kids playing basketball at the park across the street. Couples walking dogs. Normal life. Derek's phone buzzed. Text from his sponsor, Mike. "Meeting tonight. You coming?" Derek typed back. "Yeah. See you at 7. AA meetings were at the community center in a room Rachel had designated for recovery programs. Derek had felt strange attending meetings in a building funded by the woman he'd wronged. But Mike had told him that was the point. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable. That's how you remember why you're here. That night's meeting was small. 8 people in a circle of mismatched chairs. Derek shared for 2 minutes about the week's challenges, a craving after a particularly hard day, the temptation to skip a meeting, the ongoing struggle with shame. "I saw her today, my ex-wife, through glass. We didn't talk. Haven't talked in 5 years. And I thought maybe that's okay. Maybe some amends are made by staying away, by not asking for forgiveness, by just being better to the people who come after." The group nodded. They understood. Recovery was full of relationships that couldn't be repaired, only accepted. After the meeting, Derek walked home. The community center was closing for the night, lights dimming in windows. He paused across the street, watching. This building would outlast him, would help thousands of people who'd never know his name or what he'd done. And maybe that was the point. Maybe legacy wasn't about buildings with your name on them. Maybe it was about the good that happened after you were gone. 1 week later. The community center's 5th anniversary gala. Black tie fundraiser, $500 of plate money going toward program expansion. The main hall had been transformed, round tables with white linens, centerpieces of local flowers, a small stage with podium and microphone. The crowd was mixed: tech executives in designer suits, community members in their Sunday best, city council members, journalists, volunteers. Derek wasn't there. Volunteers weren't invited to donor events, but he watched the live stream on his laptop from his apartment, curious despite himself. Rachel took the podium at 8 p.m., wearing a floor-length Ralph Lauren gown, 8 months pregnant with her second child. She'd announced it last month, another boy. Ethan stood stage left, holding Lucas's hand. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Rachel's voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned to command attention without demanding it. 5 years ago, I stood in a courtroom and reclaimed my voice. I could have used that voice to scream, to destroy, to take revenge. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't typical nonprofit speech territory, and for a moment, I'll be honest, I did. I took what was rightfully mine. I watched someone who hurt me fall, and it felt necessary. Derek's chest tightened, watching through his laptop screen. But revenge is empty. It's a meal that doesn't nourish. So I made a different choice. Instead of building a monument to my ego, I built a monument to community. Instead of a glass tower with my name, I built shelter with open doors. She gestured to the audience, to the walls around them. This center serves 12,000 people annually. We've helped 2,000 find jobs, 500 get legal aid, 800 kids discover love of reading. That is legacy. Not how high you build, but how many you lift. The applause was thunderous. Derek closed his laptop. He'd heard enough. The next day, Derek arrived at the center for his usual Tuesday session. Sarah, the program coordinator, stopped him in the hallway. "Mr. Holloway, do you have a minute?" Derek's heart sank. This was it. They were terminating his volunteer position. Someone had complained, or they'd decided his presence was inappropriate given the building's origins. Of course. Sarah led him to a small office. Rachel was there, sitting behind the desk. Not confrontational, her posture was relaxed, a cup of tea beside her laptop, but Derek's pulse hammered anyway. "Derek, thank you for coming." Rachel gestured to the chair opposite. Derek sat, hands clasped between his knees. "I wanted to talk about your work with the youth program. Sarah says you've been exemplary. Patient, prepared, engaged. Thank you." Derek didn't know where this was going. "We're expanding the program, adding welding and electrical training. We need someone to coordinate all the trades instruction. It's a paid position, $40,000 a year, benefits included." She slid a folder across the desk. "I'd like to offer it to you." Derek stared at the folder like it might explode. "I don't understand." "You've spent 6 months proving you can show up, that you value this work. The kids respond to you. Parents trust you. That matters more than your past." Rachel's hands folded over her pregnant belly. "But I need to be clear. This isn't reconciliation. We're not friends. We'll never be friends. This is purely professional. You'll report to Sarah, not to me. If you compromise this program or these kids in any way, you're gone immediately." "I understand." Derek's voice was hoarse. "Why are you doing this?" "Because those kids deserve good teachers, and because you're doing the work. Real work, not just showing up, but changing." "I don't forgive easily, Derek, but I believe in second chances when they're earned, not demanded." She pushed the folder closer. "Think about it. You have until Friday to decide." Derek picked up the folder. Inside was a job description, benefits package, contract terms. A real job, not construction labor that destroyed his back, not charity. An actual position based on skills and effort. "I don't need until Friday." His eyes met hers. "I accept. And Rachel, thank you. I know I don't deserve this. I know I destroyed what we had. But I'll do right by these kids. I promise you that. I'm not doing this for you." Rachel's voice was firm, but not cruel. "I'm doing it for them. But if helping them helps you become a better person, then maybe something good came from something broken. That's not forgiveness. That's not reconciliation. That's just moving forward." Derek stood. "I understand. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not because I lost everything, but because I never saw what I had until it was gone." Rachel's hand moved to her belly, protective and unconscious. "I forgive you, Derek. Not for you, for me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I'm free." She stood, extended her hand. Derek shook it. "Professional, clean, final. Welcome to the team, Mr. Holloway." Derek walked out of that office with the folder clutched in his hand and tears streaming down his face. He made it to the bathroom before he broke down completely, sitting in a stall and weeping for everything he'd lost and everything he might still become. 2 months later. Hospital room, Swedish Medical Center. Rachel gave birth to her second son at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. Ethan had been by her side through 12 hours of labor, had held her hand and breathed with her, and told her she was strong when she was certain she couldn't continue. The baby arrived weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces with a healthy cry that filled the delivery room. They named him James Nathaniel Cole. James, for Rachel's father; Nathaniel, for the brother who'd saved her when she'd needed saving most. Nate arrived at the hospital at dawn, having driven from his house in Medina the moment Ethan called. He brought flowers and a teddy bear and the kind of joy that came from seeing family grow. He stood beside Rachel's bed, holding his nephew, tears running down his face. "He's perfect, Ellie." Rachel, exhausted and radiant, smiled. "He really is." Nate handed her a small box. "From the Sterling Family Trust, for James." Rachel opened it. Inside was a key to a trust fund, and beneath it, a handwritten note. Rachel recognized the handwriting her mother's written before the plane crash, sealed in a safety deposit box with instructions to be opened when Rachel had her second child. "True wealth is knowing who you are when you have nothing, and who you become when you have everything." Rachel read the words through tears. Mom knew. She always knew. Ethan stood behind Nate, holding Lucas, who was craning to see his baby brother. They were a family. Imperfect, built from ruins, stronger for having survived. 5 years later. Lucas turned 10. The community center was celebrating its 10th anniversary. The building had expanded an adjacent lot, purchased a new wing built for mental health services and addiction recovery programs. Derek had been promoted to Director of Vocational Training 3 years ago, overseeing programs that had helped over 5,000 people learn trades and find employment. Derek stood in the woodworking classroom watching his students, now young adults, some of them graduates of the original youth program, teach the next generation. Miguel, the 16-year-old who'd asked about measuring twice, was now 21 and a union carpenter. He volunteered teaching middle schoolers on weekends. "Mr. Derek." Lucas appeared in the doorway. 10 years old now, tall for his age, with his father's kindness and his mother's sharp intelligence. "Mom says there's cake in the library. Anniversary celebration." Derek smiled. "Thanks, Lucas. You headed there?" "Yeah. You coming?" "I'll be there in a minute. Just finishing up here." Lucas nodded and ran off. Derek cleaned his workspace, put tools away, washed sawdust from his hands. He headed toward the library, walking through corridors lined with photos of program graduates, community events, milestones achieved. The library was packed. Staff volunteers, community members, donors. Rachel stood near the children's section, Ethan beside her, their 2 sons playing with other kids on the carpet. Nate was there with his fiancée, a brilliant engineer he'd met at a conference 2 years ago. Derek stayed in the back, leaning against a bookshelf. He watched Rachel cut the anniversary cake, watched the community celebrate a building that had become a lifeline for thousands. A bronze plaque hung on the wall near the entrance. Derek had walked past it 1,000 times, but tonight he stopped to read it again. The Rachel Sterling Community Center, built from the ruins of broken promises, rising as proof that true worth is measured not by what we take, but by what we give, dedicated to second chapters and new beginnings. Derek pulled out his wallet. The dollar bill was still there, more worn now, barely holding together. He'd carried it for 10 years. A reminder of what arrogance cost, of what hubris destroyed, of the moment his world ended and Rachel's began. He folded it carefully and slipped it back into his wallet. Maybe someday he'd spend it. Or maybe he'd carry it until it disintegrated completely, until even the physical evidence of his worst day faded into memory. Derek left the celebration early. He walked to the bus stop, passing the furniture store where he'd once seen his own defeated reflection. His reflection now showed a different man. Gray at the temples, lines around his eyes from squinting at blueprints. Hands scarred from honest work. Not the architect he'd been. Not the man he'd wanted to be. Someone better. Someone useful. Someone forgiven not by Rachel, who'd given him professional grace but never friendship, but by the teenagers who'd learned carpentry from him, by the community that had let him serve, by the second chances he'd earned one day at a time. The bus arrived. Derek climbed on, paid his fare, took a seat by the window. The community center glowed behind him, lights in every window full of life and purpose. A building that would outlast everyone who'd touched it, that would help people. Derek would never meet, that had transformed his greatest failure into his most meaningful contribution. Worth is measured by what you give, Rachel had said. Derek had given everything, lost everything, and in the losing had learned to give in ways that mattered. The bus pulled away from the curb. Through the window, Derek watched the community center fade into the Seattle night, a beacon built on the ruins of his ego, shining proof that endings were just foundations, waiting for something better to be built on top of them.